Ukraine tomorrow.
Yeah, I remember. I thought you'd be there by now. All right. Well, by the way, when you head to Ukraine, do you go to? Last time I went, you have to go to Poland, I think, and you go by car, correct?
No, I go to Moldova and then to Chisinau, Moldova, and it's a 4-hour drive to Odessa or 8-hour drive to Kiev. I'm going to Kharkiv.
You're heading.
So it'll be
Kharkiv.
Kiev, and then I'll do about 4 hours there, and then I'll drive to Kharkiv.
You're going to the war zone.
Yeah, well, we're doing training. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I was offered when I was there. I was offered to go to Kharkiv, and I wanted to because I like the adrenaline of it, but I was warned not to. I've been to Kharkiv. I used to go to. There's a hotel there. I spent a lot of time. I've people very close to me that lived there, and I spent months in Kharkiv in the main hotel, Grand Palace, something along those lines. The name. It's a beautiful city. Anyway, look, it's Admiral. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and good timing to be on as well. There's just some discussions from a military perspective that I want to get your take on. But before we do that, let's get your thoughts on the developments that have happened so far. The Israeli Security Cabinet has been convening for more than 3 hours. That just came in as we're going live. On the Iranian side, they had a pretty big vessel get through the blockade. Not sure if you heard. A vessel worth $250 million had $250 million worth of oil. I think it was called Huge, something similar, or Massive, or something like that. That was the name of it. Let me give you the exact name. The name of it was Huge. There we go. $220 million in crude was somehow able to get through the blockade, according to tanker trackers. And another report by Tanker Tracker says 25 tankers departed Iran with crude oil in April. 15 made it through the Strait of Hormuz and reached their destination. 7 were turned back by U.S. forces. 2 were seized in the Indian Ocean, and 1 delivered in the Far East. That's unrelated. But so 15 out of the 25 last month were able to get through. 40% were intercepted. And obviously, you're seeing the rhetoric on both sides. The Iranian demands seem to be the same they were in the early days of the ceasefire. What do you make of all the developments that have happened so far? Are we heading to conflict? Does it seem less likely from what you're seeing?
So we'll have to see. My take is that they're blocking most of the vessels. I get that the vessels that left in April before the convoy, the blockade was in full effect. Some have been able to, as you mentioned, get through and deliver. Some have been picked up because the U.S. decided to go start getting them. I think they're probably a little slow doing that, but plus they're spread out. And the ones that were going directly to India, that's harder because, if they went through 5 or 6 days before the blockade was called, they're probably 2 or 3 days out of India. So we'll have to see how that plays out. The reality is, though, the vast majority of Iranian fuel is not going to get. It's being placed into tankers right now or into empty tanks in the country, and it's not going to get delivered. And they were relying on about $15 to $17 billion a month worth of fossil fuel deliveries and sales, about $350 billion a year. And I would say at this point, that's probably 90 or 95% of their exports. So this is going to be a big block. And I get it, 1 or 2 will get through. I'm not going to the world, and deliver. And that's not great for the blockade, but it's not the end of the blockade. The blockade will have its effect. And then the question is, what effect does that have on the Iranian economy? I think if the president does 2 things, which he never does, which is be patient and be disciplined, he might find out 6 weeks from now that he's brought enough pressure on him. For sure, I think he's going to wait 3 weeks.
Okay, so I've got a few questions for you on that. Number one is, how do you know that the ships are not going through? Because I speak to different people. Some share what you've just mentioned. Obviously, you've got a lot of experience, so that's obviously given. But there's others that are making the argument that there isn't enough warships there to seize all these ships. There's just so many cargo ships that could flow through the Strait of Hormuz. How could they be seized, even if they can see them on the radars? And the other argument is a lot of ships are passing through, they're kind of hugging the Pakistani coastline, avoiding international waters. So isn't that another way that the Iranians can get through the blockade?
Sure, till the Pakistani coastline ends.
Okay.
And you're absolutely right. Look, do I think Iran can deliver to Iran still? I think so. And there is some of that. There's been some of that where an Iranian tanker gets away from Iran port, goes to a different one and makes a delivery of something. In theory, that's in violation of the blockade. In practice, the blockade isn't that jammed up against the Iranian ports. The goal here is to prevent fossil fuels from going to India and China. I mean, there's a few other countries, but it's principally India and China. And the truth is, you don't have to blockade it at the the blockade you can grab them around Sri Lanka. You can grab them near the Straits of Malacca where one of them was grabbed. You can, in theory, you can grab them on the other side of the Straits of Malacca. I think the Chinese would be a little more pissed about that. At that point, it's going to China, and the Chinese would be not pleased. And I think right before the summit, we would try to grab everything before the Straits of Malacca. The Straits of Malacca is a great equalizer, by the way. You're not avoiding it, and we'll see you. And if we decide that we want to board you, we'll wait till you get out international waters on the other side. In other words, they can eventually reasonably stop 90 to 95% of this fossil fuel trade. And you're right, a full 2 million barrel large vessel, what the large vessels are, 2 million barrels at $120 a barrel is $240 million worth of cargo. So that whoever told you that number is probably accurate. And my gut reaction is a few more will deliver over the next, they're already in the international waters of a country that would not appreciate us doing a boarding and delivering into that country, and they'll deliver. But that doesn't bother me. The goal here is to cut off $15 billion, which is basically, if you do the math on it, about 50 ship deliveries a month worth of fuel, and I think that's doable, and I think they'll have that impact. Now, look, I also don't think the president really has the option to start strikes before May 14th. He has a already delayed one summit with President Xi of China, and I think he wants that summit to happen. And I think, but that's beautiful from my point of view. That's discipline. That means he can't do anything to May 20th, which is almost 2.5 more weeks. And I just think we should see what the pressure's like on the Iranian economy. I can't believe the economy's in good shape. I don't know what you hear about that, but
no, it's the same. Now there's a professor, I keep referencing him from, I keep forgetting the name and the university. I think Steve Hank from not from Harvard, from University College in the US, and he made the argument that the Iranian economy is worse than what the media says. But he also makes another argument. He's like, so as part of that argument, he also believes that the global economy, if this continues, he's from Johns Hopkins, economic professor. He's also been an advisor to various governments, including the UAE. And he says, so he's been measuring the Iranian economy for many, many years. And he says their inflation is higher, over 100%, 160% inflation. So it's in a very bad shape. But he also believes that they're a lot more resilient than the rest of the world, because this is existential for them. The rest of the world, for the US, it's a war of choice. For the rest of the world, it's not even choice. They kind of been forced into it. And he's also really worried of the impact this will have on the global economy. And I was going through the numbers as well yesterday. There's some countries like Pakistan. Pakistan has 0 days worth of fuel in their storage, worth of oil in their storage, 0. Other countries like Indonesia's at 20 days, Vietnam at 30 to 45. So when you talk about blockade going on for another 4 to 6 weeks, yes, it could work militarily, but from an economic perspective, do you really think that Trump, and with the pressure from his allies and inflation, do you think he can sustain it?
So look, I think the way to look at this is the world's two largest economies, the US and China, are not as directly affected. One, because we have a lot of our own oil and natural gas. Two, because China, to its credit, credit, I'm not sure is the right word, is not an oil and LNG driven electrical power grid. They have a lot of coal on there, nuclear on there, and renewables, but with an emphasis on coal. In addition, China has the world's largest storage of reserves, months of reserves. Now, one thing I'll note about China is that, and this is consistent since 1949, they're not going to do shit to help the rest of the world. The U.S. has been releasing fuel from its strategic reserves that Europe has. I have not heard of China releasing any.
No, they have. I heard. I'll check the source. They've released it to some of their neighbors. Maybe it's strategic to get them further away from the U.S. But apparently, they've released some oil from their reserves to help some neighboring countries. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen promises. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
Look, that would be an improvement. By the way, that would solve Malaysia, Indonesia, in theory, Pakistan is a client state of China, so they would be open for that too. That would be good. That would be, I would applaud China for that. It would be the first time they've done anything for anyone else ever. Unless you count the invasion of North Korea in 1950. Just not being too cynical, but they have not been helpful on things. Now, look, here's how I look at it. The second part of this, and this is a problem for the U.S. If this convoy doesn't work, if this blockade doesn't work, and the resilience of the Western economies and our Asian partners, allies like Korea, Japan, Taiwan, if our resilience is worse than the Iranian resilience, then at some point we're going to have to relieve that. Which is why I think it's about time the U.S. starts to talk about convoy operations. In other words, 2 or 3 U.S. destroyers escorting through 1 or 2 Saudi merchants. I think you grab a country like Saudi Arabia, who can self-insure, right? Because the claim right now is, well, the ships won't go because they won't be insured. I think I know a country that can insure $1 billion ship without batting an eye. In fact, I know 2 of them, both Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates could do this. And self-insure a ship, say we insure it, merchant, captain, let's go. And with the United States, with 3 destroyers escorting 2 merchants through, but you'd have to do some prep for this, about a week of what's called Q routes, checking to make sure there's a clean route, about 1,000, a mine-cleared route to the Southern Transit Scheme, the one near Oman, that's 1,000 yards wide, 20 miles long, through the hairpin, and then down through the western approaches down to Abu Dhabi, Jebel Ali. And then the ships get in that. They have overhead 6 to 8 fighter aircraft at all times, 2 to 3 ships, A-10s, and attack armed helos to take care of any small boats. Small boats are not going to get through A-10s. I'll just tell you, there's not a historical precedent of that. And after the first 8 or 10 get sunk, I think the other small boat guys will figure out this is probably not a winner against an A-10. And armed helos are just as effective. And you have F-15s, F-16s, F-18s to shoot down drones and missiles and to attack anyone who launches. And then the 3 destroyers themselves can shoot down drones and missiles. And then you go through. And I think you take 1 or 2 sets through like that. You re-sanitize it with minesweepers again. You patrol all night long with aircraft that if any small boat comes out to try to lay mines, you hit it. I mean, you can do this. And then we can say to the Iranians, now you have a problem. We're allowing some of the people you hate the most, the Saudis and the UAE, to get their fuel, their LNG and oil through, and you're still not.
Okay, so first, you're right. China has not released any of their oil reserves for any neighboring countries. Apparently, it's just rumors, or maybe they're considering it. So you're right on that front. You seem to know China pretty damn well. So on the front of the escort of the ships, that's interesting because what everyone says is that become sitting ducks for Iranian missiles and drones. You don't think so?
Well, so 3 destroyers I've escorted through. And by the way, when we escorted in I wasn't there in 87 when they started it, but there was back then we didn't have like the Illuminati of insurance companies sitting in London deciding no one's going. And that's what's happened now. Something called the Joint War Council is involved, and they decide no one's going. Back in 1988, everybody got in a line and we went. In fact, the very first ship going through hit a mine, and we had a 3-week delay. And then we said, let's go again. And everybody got in line and we went again. And the ship called the Bridgeton hit a mine, and we had to clear the minefield, get it right, and then take them through. Things have changed. Now there's fear and risk, and there's social media, and there's constant media attention. In other words, no one was yelling at the company for trying to get the Bridgeton through. Now, if you're the company who hits a mine, you're going to get yelled at on TV that you're a fool to listen to the U.S. Navy. No one said to the merchants back in 1988, hey, the U.S. Navy led you into a minefield. You hit a mine. What the hell's wrong with you guys? They just said, hey, let's try it again 3 weeks later. And then we started, and we had 25 consecutive successful escorts of ships out. What I'm saying now is you set this up. You do have to do sweeping. But the cruise missile, these cruise missiles, if the ships are within 500, 1,000 yards of a U.S. Navy destroyer, and the U.S. Navy destroyers will be slightly forward, north of them to be biased towards the Iranian coast, have them staggered right. 3 destroyers are going to be able to take down any missiles. Right now, any missiles or drones fired at them. And my logic for that is we've we've had several hundred, like 400 missiles fired at our ships by the Houthis, the same missiles and drones. And we had several hundred fired by the Iranians during this war. And you haven't heard of any hits on U.S. Navy ships. And in fact, their self-defense systems have only had to operate once or twice. Where
they were far away. They were very far from the coast. If they have to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz, it becomes a lot easier.
I worry about the missiles there because they're coming fast. They're coming like just under Mach. Probably 500-600 miles an hour. Drones are not going 500-600 miles an hour. They're going 140. And by the way, I think our fighters can go feet dry over Iran at 25,000-30,000 feet. And in fact, people go, well, what if they shoot at you? I said, well, now you have a new target. Because dodge that missile, and then the other plane puts one right down whatever. I don't think these guys are not hanging out at 3,000 feet. But they sit up there, and then they dive down and take out drones. Again, I don't have to explain all the tactics. I'll just say, I think with enough aircraft up, enough ships, you can just keep reducing risk. And at some point you go, okay, this is a shield of American power. It's not something we don't have to replicate 100 times. That would suck. But we do it enough times to drag through 10, 20, 30 tankers over a month. And we'd say, look, it's not the same level, but if you combine this movement where you're doing large LNG, probably large fertilizers, continue the oil shipments through the cross Arabian Peninsula, Saudi pipeline, and the down south to Oman, UAE pipeline. And we say, look, we're going to get our stuff out and our friends' stuff out, and you're not going to get any of your stuff out. So, that's how we have to play this. And you're right. Maybe we don't have the resilience, but I'd at least test all these things. The last thing I would do is throw my hands up in the air and say, we're done, which is, I know you're not arguing for that, but I do think I hear that plaintive when I do a lot of media interviews, like, on CNN or Fox or News Nation. They're like, is there anything we can do? Yeah, there's a lot we can do. These are choices. And I do think the Saudis will take risk with us, and the UAE. And I think if one takes risk, the other will. I mean, the beauty of those two is the competition with them will help us a little bit.
I've got a lot of questions for you, Admiral. So, so first, if it was possible, why not do it earlier? When Trump was talking about allies helping him, etc. And then I want to add to it a bit more. If you look at the CNN report of the damage to the bases in the region as well, that's been getting a lot of attention. Yeah. The radars that were destroyed, some of the bases becoming inoperable. Is there a possibility that Iran's capabilities are maybe more than what we're assuming right now?
So we'll break that up. First, we'll talk about the air defense of the bases. Unacceptable. The U.S. Army cannot defend ground bases against the close range ones. And you hit it just right. The theory you're talking about earlier with distance to the vessels is exactly the problem that we saw in this. I think the U.S. Army got comfortable that the U.S. Air Force could shoot down all the drones. And that's because when several hundred drones were fired twice at Israel, the U.S. Air Force got in behind them. And when I say several hundred, I mean 300 or 400 drones. They shot them all down until the Israelis shot them all down, and nothing got to Israel. And they're like, well, you shot down.
In the 12-day war, especially.
In the 12-day war, and then once before then. Well, I mean, it's a 140 knot drone, and you were chasing it for 400 miles. Congratulations. You shot them all down. Now, when you're shooting a whole bunch of them across 110 miles at the thinner, at the strait in the Arabian or Persian Gulf, now you got a problem. And you couldn't be feet dry then over Iran because we weren't sure where we were. Certainly at a low altitude, you couldn't be. So we did not do a good job shooting down the drones. And then the Army failed to understand the impact that these drones could have in combat. And that's a problem because we could see it in Ukraine. And people like me and lots of people like me, not just me, were coming back last year and saying, there's a problem. They have these fixed, ground-launched drone interceptors. You've heard their names now, like Mirops and Octopus and others, that were about 60 to 80% effective against Shahed, or in the case of the Russians, Jiran drone. So they would fire two, and it'd be like 90+% effective against every drone. Well, that's not what we saw happen. The U.S. Army had none of that. They had a couple older. Well, because a part of it's arrogance. They did have a limited system called Cyclops that I don't think did well. And then they had reliance on Patriots, and Patriot is not good against a 140 knot target. Plus, it's 4 million around. There's a trail of tears about the U.S. Army air
Yeah,
defense.
we talked about it last time. Yeah.
It goes back to, I've been screaming about a missile system that could have been really effective. I call it the Phoenix Suns, two years away from being 2 years away, which is a NBA joke. They, which by the way was proven out again this year. They're going to have, our U.S. Army has a lot to answer for. Now, what do I think's happened since? Now, here's the other problem: our Arab partners and our European partners, not the ones who are close to Ukraine, have been buying counter drone interceptors, like Poland and the Balts. But a lot of Europe and the United States allied, Asian allies and Arab allies have not been buying air defense systems and counter drone systems because we kind of lead the way. So we didn't lead ourselves down a bad path. We led Saudi, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE down a bad path.
The UAE the UAE relied a lot on Israel. You saw the Iron Dome deployed in Israel.
UAE definitely went through an unknown back door, right? I mean, if you had told me, 3 years ago, it was crazy to think that U.S. forces would be in Israel. They'd sworn for 50 years, no Americans will be on Israeli, territory shedding blood. They used to tell me that all the time when I'd work with them on stuff. Like I'd bring THAAD batteries in for exercises. They mark this as just an exercise. In the real world, they'll never be here. Well, turns out they were there. American ground soldiers haven't been killed in Israel defending. And we have ships off the coast that have done a pretty good job of shooting down the more longer intermediate range ballistic missiles that have been aimed at Israel, a couple at Turkey and Crete and things like that. But what we don't have are counter drone interceptors. Now, thankfully, President Zelensky has stepped into the breach. He's offered them to our Arab partners. He's offered them to us too. I'm hoping we all have them. If we don't have them at this point, shame on us. But to your early point, that was.
Were you surprised? Were you surprised by the destruction in those bases?
Yeah, I was disappointed. My presumption was that I didn't understand the war plan to the degree that they could destroy all the I figured that if they weren't buying drone interceptors, it's because they had the drones dialed in, and they're going to get rid of them offensively in the first 48 hours. Clearly that didn't happen because drone attacks happened it dropped off, but drone attacks happened pretty aggressively for a week or for 5 days, then dropped off, but happened moderately for 3 more weeks.
Sustained it. Not 3 weeks, the whole week, the whole war. They haven't stopped it throughout the entire war. But that's just, again, from someone from me, like an expert, but from everyone I spoke to, that's expected. Like the ability to manufacture drones, we spoke about it, how they're very easy to manufacture in warehouses, even underground.
It's the stowage, I think, that got us. They're going to have trouble manufacturing right now because I think we removed all the defensive industrial base stuff. Can they rebuild that in less than a year? You bet, but not like in a week or a month.
Yeah.
But they clearly have a bunch. As I've said, you and I don't know how big your garage is, but we can put 10 or 12 Shaheeds in there, and we can carry them in, and we can carry them out, just the two of us. Now, if you and I are seen carrying them out of an Iranian garage, for any period of time, say like 5 minutes, we're probably going to get a missile on us. So you better carry them out and launch them pretty quickly. But they can stow them. And that's not even underground, which is what I think's up with some of the ballistic missiles. I think those are stowed in underground facilities that may or may not be able to easily access right now, but the missiles are probably not destroyed.
Okay. Also, I've got so many questions for you from a military aspect. This precision of these strikes by the Iranians, that obviously shows they had access to the Chinese satellite. Would you agree? To be able to strike all these radars, for example.
They had access to someone's satellite data, and radars don't. Here's the problem with, again, I'm not saying the Navy's great because they're not. We have lots of flaws, but our ships can move. They do move, and that makes it harder for a 145 mile an hour, small seeker head weapon like a Shahed or Duran to find the target. On the other hand, those air defense radars probably did not move from the day they were laid down in Kuwait or Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or UAE. They never moved, and neither did our partners. I mean, if they moved, it was a once every 3 year event. And so did they have access to, did they have long term, had they gotten access to overhead imagery? Yes. Do I think in the short term they got it from someone, China or Russia? You bet. Because you want to check that before you fire, before you group or swarm on something. You'll want to do a double check. Hey, is it still really there before I expend this effort? And I do think they hit some things like air bases and newly built op centers that were reasonably new targets. So someone was giving them overhead imagery.
Well, I wrote a point here to credit your Illuminati of insurance in Europe. I want to give you credit for that new quote. I'm going to start using it. The insurance Illuminati in Europe. Just one more question on that. So the reason I mentioned the US bases is it possible that you're underestimating their capabilities? And could that be a reason why Trump did not open the Strait of Hormuz beforehand?
Yeah. So look, do I think that there's risk in doing convoy ops? You bet. I think we've already had 2 ships go in and out of the straits, without getting attacked. And here's
we talked about it. Yeah, Iran says they turned them around, but you said no. You're pretty confident they haven't.
I'm pretty confident that's not how it went down. But more importantly, let's say we start to escort 3 ships through. What's the Iranian game here? That they're going to attack Western, fuel headed to Europe. I mean, if I did this, I'd be smart. I'd pick the most, the people that I most want to help me, the Germans. Probably turn them a little bit, maybe the Brits. Fuel coming to them is coming through from Saudi Arabia, from United Arab Emirates, or from Kuwait, and but probably the first 2. Drag them through, and then if they're attacked by the Iranians and hit, we turn to those countries and say, "Look, we're trying our hardest to enforce international law." The right of transit passage in international waterway, and they're attacking. Are you still going to sit on the sidelines? Because it's embarrassing enough for Europe to watch Keir Starmer, who is no Winston Churchill, sit on the sidelines after 32,000 or so Iranians were murdered in like 36 hours. After a regime that is hell-bent on getting a nuclear weapon, and has stated on occasion what they would do with that nuclear weapon should they attain it. Who's built weapons that clearly have the range of Europe, to continue to take no action in this. At some point, being churlish to Donald Trump has a political value to it. I get it. And Donald Trump has earned no good graces from the Europeans. But at some point, this is a mission worthy of European participation. And if they never realize that, then there really will be a break with the United States. They have to be very careful here. The Europeans, guys like me, understand the Greenland shit was wrong, how he's talked about them. But I equally understand, having served in Europe in the 2010s when they spent a sparkling 1.2% on defense and were completely dependent on the United States, and we're complete freeloaders, to then turn and go, now that we say we might defend ourselves, they haven't done anything to do that. They've spent just a slightly more money. Now that we say we might defend ourselves, we're going to tell you to pack sand when you have something that you consider a national security issue.
But they don't. But obviously they don't. Like in terms of the Iranian missiles that could reach Europe, they haven't developed any of them. There's one that went to 2 of them that went to Diego Garcia, but those were possibly they just removed the warheads from them. Again, that's I'm paraphrasing what others have said. So they haven't really built those, and they might not perceive Iran as big of a threat as the Americans do. Go ahead.
Okay, they went to Diego Garcia. I know you can get your calipers out and swing that back to Europe and realize.
No, I mean the reason that those reached Diego Garcia is they removed the warheads from them, so they were missiles without warheads.
I mean that changes the range marginally.
Okay, that doesn't. I had a gentleman come on and said that on the show, so that's why I'm mentioning. No. So you don't think that's?
They could have removed the warheads. I have no idea, but that's not enough to give them 1,000 kilometers of range. I mean, they're still going to get. What gives them the range is the initial boost and their ability. They've done some good work on getting up into the exoatmosphere with some of these.
But I think, Mark, Admiral, if a country like Iran develops missiles that could reach Europe, it doesn't. They haven't threatened to attack Europe. They haven't taken any steps to attack Europe. Just from a military perspective, I understand how they're a big threat to Israel. I think that's unquestionable. Yeah. From the rhetoric, also from their actions. So not only rhetoric is one thing, North Korea is full of rhetoric, but the actions have shown otherwise. I just didn't really see Iran as that big of a threat. It's a regime that I dislike massively. I would love to see nothing else than a different government take place, replace them, preferably peacefully. But did you really think there would be a threat to Europe that would attack Europe without being attacked?
If Europe were to stand up to Iran, Iran would threaten Europe. So if what you're saying is that by
But that's defensive.
but by saying that if the European, now look, this could be true. You could be right. I could be wrong on this. The European plan might be to cower, and then Iran will never consider them a threat, and they won't target them. But once somebody has a weapon, and it can reach you, if your policy is I don't want to offend them, it's going to be a rough 30 years. And this regime's done some nasty things in Europe, mostly to Iranians, but also to Europeans. I mean, in terms of sponsoring terrorist operations, in terms of killing Iranian exiles. I mean, most countries care about that. That's just what I don't get. And
I agree. But like Saudi's done that, Turkey's done that, China's done that. There's so many. Russia's done that.
Saudi did it, and they did it to a guy, and we held them somewhat accountable. One guy. I would just say, look, I'm not. That's a problem. They should not have done that to the journalists. But I will tell you, it pales in comparison to what Iran's doing and done. And then finally, I would just say, these guys talk a big game about their care for activists and peace protesters, and they're mighty quiet about what Iran did in January. I mean,
that was atrocious. I don't know if they were quiet, but that's appalling. Yeah, without those protests and the crackdown,
I would say inactive, maybe not quiet.
Yeah,
but.
yeah. It's always tricky when these things happen. Like when I look at them, because on one side, and I was so vocal about it, I was labeled. There was a whole campaign labeling me a Zayo asset paid by Israel because I was so vocal about what the regime was doing. But I'm always skeptical of regime change operations. Obviously, you know why. I have a few more questions for you.
Sure.
In the time that I still have with you, Admiral. The first one is the Dark Eagle. I'm just not. So please explain to me. I've asked a lot of people, and if someone loves the US, they give me one explanation. If someone wants to criticize the US military or is anti-US, they give me another explanation of how weak the military is. But I'm trying to understand, number one, what is the Dark Eagle? It's Mark V. It doesn't have that big of a range. There's only 8 of them or 12 of them. They cost $40 million. And the ability to produce them is like 1 to 2 a month versus China and Russia, which is dozens. Why? Is that true, and why?
So we had a law that governed, called the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. It governed development of ground-based weapons like this that you would launch. We and the Russians agreed to it. In the 2014-15 timeframe, we started to realize the Russians were cheating on it. They have a very large country. They were testing things on the interior. We were getting some overhead imagery. We began to accuse them in private. We eventually revealed it in public in like 2018. China, by the way, never signed up for it. So they've been building intermediate range, long range ballistic missiles, some of which get close to hypersonic speed, for 20 years. And now they're shifting towards hypersonic speed. So we're 20 years behind maybe not 20, 15 years behind the Chinese, 10 years behind the Russians. Then in 2019 or 2020, near the end of his administration, maybe 2019, Trump abrogated our participation in the INF, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And
because he believed Russia was cheating on
as he said they were cheating from that he revealed, and we had revealed it slightly earlier in his administration, but and now the Russians just openly talk about the systems, and they're way developed. So you're like, okay, you've had them for 5 years, 7 years. I mean, the Russians all but say we're cheating, right? By talking about the systems in a state of advancement that could not have occurred if they started the day we started.
Oh, wow. So the treaty did not allow for the hypersonic missiles they've built. They were not legally allowed to based on that treaty?
Ground-based missiles over 500 kilometers were not allowed. So that's why ATACMS, that's the limit on ATACMS range, why ATACMS is limited to where it is.
Holy shit.
Right up against that. Okay. So we got out of that. Now we're working on them. I think, Dark Eagle is the perfect example. So I think I've said on here before, there's 2 types of weapon systems, offensive and defensive. There's a massive defense tech change going on in offensive. So like something like a JASM ER, our long-range strike weapon we've been using against Iran, I would guess it's 2.2 million a copy, somewhere in that range. Some were bought cheaper. But if you're to replace them now, 2 million a copy. Very survivable. We'll say more than, I don't know what the range is, but it's got to be at least 500 miles, and it gets, and it's very accurate. Okay. We have started to build using low-cost production, things like 3D printing, other additive manufacturing, Some things are still the same. Fuel still costs the same. The weapons, the explosives still cost about the same. But we can now build an equivalent missile that's not as survivable for $250,000, 10% the cost. Well, shit, we're going to build a lot of those. Now, in hypersonic, same thing. This Dark Eagle, which, I mean, I've heard 40 million too. It's jaw-dropping that's the cost. Mach 5. I know for a fact that there are companies out there building low-cost versions of that for 300,000 to 800,000 a copy, depending on what range you want. I mean, this is like for 2% to 5% of the cost of the alleged cost of 40 million. So and they'll be able to build them at scale. So the Dark Eagle is going to come and go in the night, in my mind. If we build those, that's almost like fraud on the government. You know what I mean? If there's a lower cost one. Now, here's the challenge. Defensive systems like Patriot, THAAD, Standard missiles we fire from ships, they also cost 3 million to 30 million a copy for the SM-3 Block 2A or Block 2B, Block 2A. But here's the problem. Lowering the cost of those is hard because one missile, your inbound missile is going Mach 5, your outbound missile is going Mach 5. And instead of just hitting a GPS spot, which is dumb luck, easy, cheap, you now have to meet each other in 1 square meter, which means the defensive missile has to have like all kinds of special adaptive motors and a really cool seeker warhead, and a smart computer, and it costs money. So we have figured out how to drop the cost of offense, but not defense. This is going to matter a lot. And it's going to especially matter a lot for our Arab partners who need to build defensive systems against Iran. I mean, I think the starting point for most Arab partners, except maybe the UAE, is we're not going to start this war with Iran. And so you're going to take that first hit. You better have good defensive systems. And so they're going to spend a lot of money. I mean, there's a reason Saudi Arabia is sitting on a pile of 1,000 Patriots, right? It's because they've been spending a lot of money to defend themselves.
So that treaty with Russia is the reason that, and the fact that the US abided by that treaty and Russia has not, and China was not part of it, is the reason that the US is so behind with hypersonic missiles.
It's why we're behind with long-range ground-based strike, of which hypersonic has now evolved into the flavor of the day.
How long to catch up? I know you mentioned how many years behind, but does that mean like 10 years to catch up to China? No way that long.
We're almost there. Our Dark Eagle is going to, which again, I'm not a fan of a $40 million weapon, but it'll
go down in cost significantly.
Yeah, it'll go down some. But if we go to that low cost production, it'll go down a lot. Yeah. But I think our Dark Eagle will be on the market, will be available for use at low numbers around the same time their hypersonics are. Now, the difference is the Russians are starting to adapt other missiles, take other missiles that go near hypersonic speed and make them more maneuvering in their end game. And that's going to be a challenge for Patriot and THAAD and other systems. And we'll do it for them.
What is that? I keep forgetting its name. The big Russian missile that they've tested once in Ukraine as a warning shot. It could carry a nuclear warhead. What is it called? Do you know what it's called? It's all over the press.
Yeah, its name is out of my head right now. But in addition, it's a MIRV, and it dropped 6 conventional like garbage cans.
Yeah, exactly.
Large metal objects that were going about Mach 6 when they hit buildings, and they did a lot of damage. They can do that, but also you can take a surface-to-air missile like an SA-400 and convert it to surface-to-ground. So now you got a missile that goes just under Mach speed, coming over. It's looking for a location.
A Rushnik missile or something like that.
Yeah,
Rushnik or something.
That's the hypersonic one, yeah. But they're maneuvering. They're also doing some other adaptation that I think is really tough for the Ukrainians.
But is it these missiles, the Rushnik? From what I've been told, is that these cannot be intercepted by the US, and hypersonic missiles in general cannot be intercepted, or are very difficult. The Oreshnik, they're very difficult to intercept. Is that true?
Yeah. So with the Oreshnik, I'm not. I believe that like our Navy ships can intercept them. So our ships are safe at sea, and say a place right alongside the water, like Tel Aviv or even Jerusalem, might be able to be protected by these. With the ships. And others are SM-3s and SM-6s have some ability. I don't know about SM-3s. I think we've said out loud SM-6s have some ability to intercept hypersonic.
Yeah, there is. So this one is just give you some metrics. You probably know already. So it's a range of 3,000 to 5,500 kilometers, max speed of Mach 10 plus. Warhead six MIRVs with 6 submunitions each, and payload of 1.2 to 1.4 tons, and it's maneuverable as well.
So
But
the one
a Mach
is
10
actually,
versus like the duck.
oh yeah,
Sorry?
yeah, yeah, it's going fast. I think the one they fired is probably the Kinzel. They're
Okay.
actually are cousins, right? But they may have fired both, for all I know. I know they
Does
fired.
that worry you? But does it worry like Mach 10 versus Dark Eagle Mach 5?
No, either one of them worries me when I'm in Ukraine, but that's for a different reason, just for a self-preservation
But
reason.
like, how about Europe?
Yeah, if I were Europe, I'd be worried. And look, here's what: if you ask me, what lessons learned has Russia and China learned from Russia's failed invasion of Ukraine? Number one is the cruise and ballistic missile defense, or a cruise and ballistic missile attack, are a good investment. Despite the fact that we were shooting Tomahawks for like 40 years, I don't think it just caught on there in the way that they're like, hey, you do that back to us, you can overwhelm. Particularly, look, here's where the Europeans are really hurting. They have no capacity. Like they would buy one of these and two of those and four of these. And now you're like, no, you have to defend 60 major cities in Europe, 40 major military depots and airfields. You got to defend 100 sites. They don't have 100 Patriot batteries. They don't have 100 Patriot plus, plus Arrow, plus, they have some other systems, ISTR, they have French systems and British systems. But when you add them together, they could probably, I'd be surprised if they could protect 10% of their CAL, their critical asset list. You make a list of what's critical, do I need to defend? If they could defend 10% of it, I'd be shocked. By the way, our Arab partners could defend a much higher percentage of their critical asset list from ballistic and cruise missiles, but not from drones. I mean, the UAE spent a lot of money on weapons. So did Saudi Arabia. You got to UAE did. I mean, you don't want to say everyone did great because there's still a handful of casualties in the UAE, but the UAE
did very little damage compared to the amount. Like I didn't realize how significant the attack was. Like I'm looking at the leader here and how upset he is with Iran, etc., which I understand they were attacked, but also in my back of my mind, I'm like, but look, Iran warned this will happen. You have U.S. presence there. Wouldn't you expect that? But then when I spoke to his advisor and he said to me, Mario, if you compare how much we've been attacked compared to other Gulf countries and how much we trade with Iran, military presence here, the U.S. military presence is less than other places like Bahrain and Qatar. Bahrain has relationships with Israel too. We were attacked at such a high level. And then when I started looking at the numbers and thinking about it further, I'm like, wow, there could have been significantly more destruction in the UAE.
Well. 60% of the missiles, ballistic cruise and missiles and drones were fired at UAE, of the ones fired at the Arab states. 60%. And they did well. They did very well. Now, look, I think they know why. UAE and Iran have some beef. They have beef over some islands, they have beef over field claims, oil and gas field claims. That's actually more tactile. Those beefs are more easy to touch than the Saudi, Bahraini, Qatari beef with the Iranians, which is more about a potential issue.
And how big do you think they did the support from the Israelis here in the Iron Dome? How big of a role do you think that played?
I suspect it was helpful. Iron Dome is a good counter drone weapon. I'd be interested.
Like what a world we live in, too, Admiral. Yeah. Like what a world we live in. Like the fact that we're in a place now where there's an Iron Dome in the UAE against Iran, and the UAE is pissed off at Saudi that's partnering with Turkey and Pakistan. Like, holy shit.
I know. I'd even ask your UAE friend whether the United Arab Emirates did air attacks against Iran. I suspect.
No way. Like, come on. There's no. I know. Look.
Ask.
I did.
A straight denial or a non-denial?
I really don't know. I'm just gonna say I don't know. I genuinely don't know the answer. Like there was also a report today by IRIB in Iran. They're also talking about it again. They believe it's like an analyst saying that they believe it actually happened. But there is no way the UAE would do that. That just sounds suicidal. I understand they already have a bad relationship, but you can't just go to your enemy up north. That could destroy the whole. You base your whole country on the image of security, stability, and safety, and then you go and just poke the bear. No matter how pissed off you are, you diversify your security. You know, they went to China. You know, they had Israel there. They're doubling down on the U.S. arms purchases, which I'll read the report that just came in. But you don't just go and then poke them again at a time when they're already pretty pissed off with everything.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
All right, man. Don't advise them based on how you don't advise them. You'll get them in trouble.
I'm not telling them to do it. Look, I get it though. I was Mohammed bin Zayed, and I had tried very hard to work with Iran, despite their beef.
That's true. Actually,
you came at me 6 times anyone else. At some point, you can't be bullied. All right. Okay.
But as the last thing I want to ask you about is the arms purchases from the Gulf. There is U.S. State Department just approved $8.6 billion in military sales to Israel, Qatar, Kuwait, and the UAE. That includes what's the APKWS? I keep forgetting what it stands for.
I've been talking to you about this. This is Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System. It's a 2.75-inch rocket that shoots down drones. You carry it on F-15s, F-16s, F-18s.
Finally, someone I've asked this to so many of my guests. I've asked this so many of my guests. No one would be able to explain it. So I'm glad someone knows what it is.
$25,000 round. I'm sure we charge UAE and Qatar and Bahrain like $40,000, but let's just say $25,000 round shoots down a $50,000 Shahed. It flips the cost curve, but you got to get behind them. This is what I was saying. These are the things that shot down the ones on the way to Israel the second time after the 12-day war.
So they fired from the ground?
No, they fired from the F-15 or an F-16 or F-18.
Oh, okay.
Barrel launchers that each have 7 APKWS. So you carry 14 rockets. Up in Ukraine about 4 weeks ago, a pilot shot down 11 Shaheds in 1.5 hour flight. He got it behind a swarm of them and just pop, hit 10 of them with these APKWS and 1 with guns.
Interesting. Okay. And then they sold also $4 billion of Patriots to Qatar.
There you go. Those should be delivered sometime in the next decade.
And before Europe as well. And before Europe.
Actually, prioritize, because they expend them in.
They were prioritized.
Yeah. If they expend them in defense of our bases, then we're going to prioritize you. You're going to get some help.
Yeah. There was a report I read. It was already prioritized.
For any country that is firing missiles in the defense of our bases and they want some more missiles, yes. The answer to that needs to be yes.
Is it one last quick question? Is it true that the U.S. has prioritized Israel over the Gulf, as many people are saying?
Look, they're buying they buy different things. Israel's buying a lot of offensive weapon systems. Remember, Israel's defensive weapon systems are Arrow, David Sling, Tamir missiles in Iron Dome. Not the things being purchased by the Gulf countries. So, look, do I think that if they both asked for a JASSM-ER, Israel would probably get it first? But my theory then is you expend it as part of a campaign with us. So that'd be the same rule. People spreading that rumor are just trying to drive a wedge between the U.S., Israel, and the U.S.'s Arab partners.
Look, I could go on for another couple of hours. Admiral, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. Have a safe flight to Ukraine tomorrow. Thank you. All right, everyone. The amount of you could agree with the stances, disagree with the stances, but the amount of knowledge that the Admiral has on the U.S. military and U.S. military equipment in general, is second to none. And he was able to answer all the questions, give very detailed explanations as well. So that's why I tried to move away from the stance on Iran, etc., which he's very direct, and we could have that debate. But I really wanted to have a military discussion to understand, the substance behind the headlines. When there is, like the APKWs that the Admiral was just explaining. As you guys know, I've asked it for a few guests before. No one could really explain what it is until the Admiral immediately done so and explained what they are and why they're being used. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I'll be going live again in, I think, 40 minutes. I've got a final guest for today, and I'll do a news recap after that for you guys. Richard Forer, who we talking about earlier, I was talking to earlier, the connection dropped off. Anyway, let me know what you thought of this discussion in the comments. I'll go through them later tonight before going to bed, and I'll see you again in about 30 minutes. Thanks, everyone.